Millionaire's mother offered pregnant Mistress $10 million to abort his twins. She refused 5 years later. The truth silenced them at their own charity gala. Welcome back to the Penthouse Diaries, where wealth, power, and private promises collide behind closed doors. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And whatever you do, don't leave before the end. The quietest moment in this story holds the loudest truth. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Peterson Foundation's executive suite as Raymond Peterson stared out at the city below. His mind far from the GALA sponsorship packets spread across the glass desk. 32 years old and heir to a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions, Raymond should have been focused on donor projections and legacy initiatives. Instead, all he could think about was the woman who had changed everything. Rachel Monroe. Her name alone sent a flutter of something dangerous through his chest, a feeling that had grown stronger every day for the past 14 months. From the moment she'd walked into his life as a community outreach coordinator, everything had shifted. Her intelligence was surgical, her laugh disarming, and her refusal to treat his family name like currency, both refreshing and intoxicating. "Raymond, are you even listening?" His mother's voice cut through his reverie like a scalpel. Janet Peterson sat across from him in a high-back leather chair, her silver hair styled in an immaculate chignon, her pale eyes fixed on him with the same intensity she reserved for hostile negotiations. At 58, she commanded every room she entered, her presence as absolute as the platinum cuff bracelet that caught the light as she tapped one manicured finger against the armrest. The Peterson Foundation was her monument, her proof that wealth could be wielded with precision, and she had no patience for distraction. "The gala speech needs your approval," she continued, sliding a bound presentation folder toward him. "This year's theme is Protecting Futures. The optics are critical." Raymond forced himself to focus on the polished talking points, but his phone buzzed on the desk. Despite his mother's tightening expression, he glanced at the screen. "Need to talk. Important. Can we meet tonight?" His chest tightened. Rachel's tone was different, urgent, careful. She'd been distant the past few days, canceling their usual coffee meetups, claiming she wasn't feeling well. Now this. "Who is it?" Janet's tone could have frozen steel. "No one important," Raymond lied quickly, setting the phone face down. But Janet's eyes had already narrowed. She'd built her empire by reading micro-expressions, by spotting vulnerabilities before they became liabilities. The look on her son's face, hope, fear, something reckless, told her everything she needed to know. "We need to discuss your future, Raymond." Her voice dropped to a register he recognized from childhood, the one that preceded consequences. "Your grandfather built this foundation from principle, and I've expanded it into a national model. But legacy means nothing if there's no structure to sustain it." Raymond signed the gala approval without reading it. "I'm here, aren't I? I'm doing the work." "Work isn't enough. You need to start thinking strategically. About marriage. About continuity." She paused, letting the words land. "Ashley Carmichael would be ideal. Her family's endowment history speaks for itself. Stability, discretion, the right kind of visibility." "Mother, don't mother me." Her voice sharpened. "You're 32 years old, and I will not watch you jeopardize this family's standing with careless entanglements." The words hit like a gavel, and Raymond's head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Janet leaned forward, studying him with the same cold calculation she used to evaluate grant proposals. "I'm not blind, Raymond. I've seen how you look at that outreach girl. What's her name? Monroe?" Raymond's pulse stuttered. He'd been careful, or so he thought. Their relationship had unfolded in stolen moments. Coffee meetings that became dinner dates. Strategy sessions that turned into late-night conversations where she made him laugh at the absurdity of wealth, and he glimpsed a life built on something other than expectation. They'd kept it quiet, professional in public, intimate only in the margins. But his mother had a way of finding margins and erasing them. "It's nothing," he said, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "Nothing?" Janet's smile was thin, surgical. "Then you won't mind when I handle it." But what Raymond didn't know, what he couldn't have known as he sat in that rain-soaked suite, lying to his mother while his phone carried the weight of 2 new lives, was that handling it had already begun. Because 3 hours earlier, while Raymond reviewed donor lists and Rachel waited in a clinic exam room staring at an ultrasound screen, Janet Peterson had placed a very specific call to her attorney, the kind of call that came with wire instructions, non-disclosure templates, and a plan to make a problem disappear before it ever reached a birth certificate. The rain that hammered the foundation windows that afternoon would become a motif Rachel would remember for years. The sound of a world closing in, the percussion of power reshaping biology into paperwork, and the exact moment when a mother's voice turned love into leverage and 2 heartbeats into a $10 million question. Before we dive into the story, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to share this with someone who believes money can't silence the truth. Subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries if you haven't already, because stories like this need to be told. All right, let's get into it. Rachel Monroe stared at the ultrasound screen, her breath shallow as the technician adjusted the wand and pointed to 2 distinct flickers of movement. Twins, the woman said with a smile that belonged in a greeting card. Healthy heartbeats, both measuring right on schedule for 11 weeks. 11 weeks. Rachel's hand found her stomach instinctively, as if confirming what the screen already showed. 2 lives, 2 futures, and a father who didn't know yet because she'd wanted to be certain before she told him. Before she watched his face shift from surprise to joy, or fear, or whatever reaction a man like Raymond Peterson had when legacy became biology. Would you like prints? The technician asked. Yes, 2 copies. Please. Rachel dressed quickly after the appointment, tucking the ultrasound images into her bag with hands that trembled just slightly. She'd tell Raymond tonight. Over dinner. Somewhere quiet where they could talk without his mother's shadow hovering in the corner of every conversation. They'd figure it out together. Raymond had always been good at solving problems, at finding paths through complexity. Her phone buzzed as she stepped into the rain. Meeting request, J. Peterson, 2 p.m., Foundation Tower, Private Suite 4200. Attendance required. Rachel's stomach tightened. Janet Peterson didn't send meeting requests to outreach coordinators. She sent directives to executives, summonses to attorneys, and dismissals to people who'd outlived their usefulness. But attendance required left no room for interpretation. By the time Rachel arrived at the Peterson Foundation Tower, her clothes were damp and her nerves were stripped raw. The private suite on the 42nd floor was all glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a rain-soaked city that looked like a chessboard from this height. Janet sat in a wingback chair near the window, backlit by gray light, a leather portfolio resting on the table beside her. She didn't stand when Rachel entered. Miss Monroe, thank you for coming on short notice. The politeness was a veneer, thin as paper. Please sit. Rachel sat across from her, gripping the strap of her bag, where the ultrasound images lay hidden. The room smelled like expensive leather and cold ambition. I'll be direct, Janet continued, folding her hands in her lap with the precision of someone who'd choreographed this conversation a dozen times. I'm aware of your relationship with my son. I'm also aware, she paused, her gaze dropping briefly to Rachel's midsection, of your current condition. Rachel's pulse hammered. How? Insurance claims are routed through our family office for foundation employees, Janet said smoothly. Your ultrasound this morning was flagged. I made a call. The violation landed like a slap. Rachel's medical privacy torn open and cataloged before she'd even left the clinic. I'm here to offer you options, Ms. Monroe. Janet opened the portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a wire authorization form. The amount typed in the transfer line made Rachel's vision blur. $10 million. $10 million, Janet said, her voice as steady as a contract reading. Wired to an account of your choosing within 48 hours. In exchange, you'll sign a comprehensive release, relocate out of state, and pursue a medical resolution to this situation before the end of the first trimester. The words medical resolution hung in the air like smoke. Rachel's hand moved to her bag, fingers brushing the edge of the keychain she'd clipped there that morning. A tiny digital recorder disguised as a fob something she'd bought on a whim after reading one too many stories about women whose words were erased by men with lawyers. She pressed the button. "You're asking me to terminate the pregnancy," Rachel said clearly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm offering you financial security and a fresh start," Janet corrected. "What you do with that opportunity is your choice. But let me be equally clear." Her tone sharpened. "The Peterson name is not negotiable. This family has built something that transcends individual indulgence. An heir without structure, without proper lineage, without my son's willing participation in a stable marriage? That's not legacy, that's liability." Rachel looked down at the wire form, at the number that could erase debt, fund a decade of safety, make every hard choice soft. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Take the money, baby. Rich people don't love poor girls. They just borrow them." But underneath that number in smaller print were words like irrevocable waiver of paternity claims, non-disclosure in perpetuity, and forfeiture of all future contact. "And if I say no?" Rachel asked. Janet's smile was a razor wrapped in silk. "Then you'll find that single motherhood is significantly more expensive than you've calculated. Legal fees, reputation management, custody disputes that last years, these things have a way of exhausting resources. And without a credible claim, without Raymond's acknowledgement, you'll be fighting shadows." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm offering you dignity and wealth, Ms. Monroe. The alternative is spectacle and scarcity. Choose wisely." Rachel stood, leaving the wire form untouched on the table. "I'm keeping my children, both of them. Then we have nothing further to discuss." Rachel walked out of that glass tower into the rain, her hands shaking, her keychain recorder still warm in her palm. She didn't cry. She didn't call Raymond. She just walked, block after block, until her apartment building came into view. The letter was waiting on her door. Law offices she didn't recognize. Cease and desist language. Warnings about false paternity claims and defamatory statements. Injunction threats if she named Raymond Peterson in any public or private communication. They'd started the war before she'd even left the battlefield. Rachel unlocked her door, stepped inside, and locked every bolt behind her. Then she sat on the floor, opened her bag, and looked at the 2 heartbeats flickering on glossy ultrasound paper. "We're going to need a plan," she whispered to the images. "A really good one." Outside, the rain continued to fall on a city that didn't care about promises, only power, and Rachel Monroe had just learned the difference. The first headline hit 48 hours after Rachel left Janet's suite. "Peterson heirs alleged mistress. Surfaces with pregnancy claim. Sources say financial motivation." Suspected, Rachel stared at her phone screen, her coffee going cold in her hand. The article didn't name her directly. It didn't have to. Former foundation employee and recent termination following performance concerns painted the target clearly enough. The comments section was already a wildfire. "Gold digger. Another woman trying to trap a rich man. Where's the proof?" Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, then another and another. Reporters, bloggers, strangers who'd somehow found her contact information within hours of the story breaking. She powered off the phone and sat in the silence of her small apartment, the walls suddenly feeling thinner than paper. The second wave arrived by courier that afternoon. Rachel signed for the envelope with hands that had stopped shaking only because she'd run out of adrenaline. Inside was a legal document, stamped and notarized, with her signature, or something that looked disturbingly close to it, scrawled across the bottom. Acknowledgement of non-paternity and voluntary relationship termination. "I, Rachel Monroe, hereby acknowledge that Raymond Peterson is not and cannot be established as the biological father of any child I may carry." She'd never signed this, never seen it, never agreed to language that erased Raymond from his own children's lives before they'd even been born. Her hands trembled as she dialed the clinic where she'd had the ultrasound. The receptionist's voice was strained, apologetic. "Ms. Monroe, I'm not supposed to discuss this, but there's been a request for your records from the Peterson family attorneys." "What kind of request?" A pause. "They're claiming discrepancies. Something about—" "I really shouldn't say more." Rachel was at the clinic within the hour, rain soaking through her jacket as she pushed through the doors and demanded to see her file. The records clerk, a tired woman with kind eyes, hesitated before sliding a thin folder across the counter. "You should know," the clerk said quietly. "Someone added an addendum this morning. It wasn't here yesterday." Rachel opened the folder. Her ultrasound images were there. 2 heartbeats, 11 weeks, dated correctly. But underneath them was a single sheet of paper, clinical and cold. Addendum to patient file. Elective termination, consultation. Patient presented for termination options. Counseling on date. Patient expressed clear intent to proceed with elective termination of twin pregnancy. Appointment scheduled for date matching Janet's 48-hour deadline. The timestamp matched the morning after Janet's offer. The note was signed by a physician Rachel had never met. "This is fake," Rachel whispered. "I never." "I know," the clerk said, glancing toward the hallway. "Dr. Morrison doesn't even work Tuesdays, but it's in the system now. Someone with access added it remotely." Rachel's vision blurred. They weren't just attacking her credibility. They were rewriting her body into a tidy paper trail, creating a narrative where Janet's $10 million wasn't a threat, but a compassionate option Rachel had already chosen. Former staffers' claims unravel. Clinic records suggest termination planned before allegations surfaced. The headline appeared that evening. Source 2, confidential medical documentation. Rachel's phone, now turned back on out of sheer necessity, exploded with messages. Former co-workers she'd considered friends sent curt texts. "Just tell the truth. Stop embarrassing yourself." The truth was locked in a keychain recorder and 2 ultrasound prints that meant nothing against a machine built to erase inconvenient women. Rachel stood in her apartment as the sun set, looking at the life she'd built in this city, books on shelves, photos on walls, a job she'd loved before it became a liability. Then she looked at her stomach, still flat, still hiding the 2 heartbeats that made her a target. She pulled a duffel bag from her closet, clothes, documents, the ultrasound images sealed in a waterproof envelope, the keychain recorder wrapped in a sock. Cash she'd been saving for furniture, now repurposed for survival. Her phone buzzed one last time, a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Drop the claims. Final warning." Rachel opened her social media apps one by one. Instagram, Facebook, the professional networking site where her profile had already been flagged by trolls. She deleted each account methodically, erasing her digital footprint post by post. Through her apartment window, she saw it. A black SUV idling at the curb below, windows tinted, engine running. No one got out. No one needed to. The message was clear. Rachel zipped the duffel bag closed, grabbed her coat, and looked one last time at the apartment that no longer felt like shelter. Then she turned off the lights and slipped out the back exit into the rain, disappearing into a city that suddenly had no room for women who refused to vanish quietly. The neighborhood clinic was a 15-minute walk, sandwiched between a laundromat and a tax preparation office. The nurse practitioner was efficient and kind, asking no questions when Ray paid cash for prenatal visits. "Twins are doing great," the practitioner said at the 16-week appointment, adjusting the portable ultrasound wand. "Strong heartbeats. You're measuring right on track." "Can I have 2 copies of everything?" Ray asked. "One for me, one for backup." The practitioner printed duplicates without hesitation. "Smart. Always keep your own records." Ray filed 1 set in her lockbox. Mailed the 2nd set to a post office box in another state, addressed to herself under another variation of her name. Redundancy was survival. Some nights, alone in the walk-up, with sirens wailing outside and her body changing in ways that made everything real, Ray thought about the wire authorization form. $10 million. Enough to disappear properly, to build a life without checking over her shoulder, to give her children safety that didn't require sleeping with a lockbox under the bed. But safety bought with erasure wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of prison. She pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling the first flutter of movement, tiny, insistent, undeniable. "Here's the deal," she whispered to the twins growing inside her. "Safety before spectacle, truth before revenge. We don't win by being louder. We win by being right." The twins came in March, 8 weeks early, but fighters from the first breath. 2 boys. Dark hair. Lungs that protested the world before they'd even seen it. Ray named them carefully. Names that belonged to them, not to a father who'd never asked to meet them or a dynasty that had tried to erase them. She took the discharge paperwork, the birth certificates listing father unknown, and filed them alongside the audio recording, the ledgers, and the ultrasounds that proved what money had tried to bury. The years that followed were a study in scarcity and strategy. She worked 3 jobs some months: transcription at night, bookkeeping for cash, weekend shifts at a community center that didn't require references. The twins grew in a walk-up that never quite felt like home, but was always safe. She taught them to be quiet when strangers knocked, taught them that some questions didn't get answered in public. And while they slept, Ray built her case. She traced shell companies, cross-referenced donor lists, followed money from the Peterson Foundation's public tax forms into private accounts that funded nothing but appearances. She saved every document, every screenshot, every receipt that proved Janet Peterson's philanthropy was a laundering operation for family wealth. 5 years passed like a held breath. The boys turned 5 in March. They had Raymond's eyes, his serious expression, the way he tilted his head when thinking through a problem. Strangers sometimes paused when they saw the twins, identical mirrors of each other, something familiar in their features they couldn't quite place. Ray kept them out of photos, avoided crowds, lived small, until the day she saw the Peterson Foundation announce its fall charity gala, the biggest event of the season, celebrating protecting futures with a new children's wing ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ray stared at the announcement on her refurbished laptop, her coffee going cold. 5 years of hiding, 5 years of building evidence, 5 years of watching Raymond Peterson's curated life continue while her boys grew up asking why they didn't have a father like other kids. She opened a new browser window and began researching the gala venue, the guest list, the media coverage planned. The twins played with blocks in the corner, building towers and knocking them down, unaware that their mother was planning to knock down a much bigger structure. Safety before spectacle, Ray whispered to herself. But sometimes spectacle is safety. She had one shot, one moment to make 5 years of silence speak louder than a lifetime of lies. The Peterson Foundation Gala was 3 months away. Time to stop hiding. 5 years later. The children's wing ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m., an hour before the main gala. Ray stood in the hospital corridor with her 5-year-old twins, each boy's hand gripped tightly in hers as camera crews set up and foundation staff directed guests toward the photo opportunity. She dressed the boys carefully that morning, collared shirts, dark pants, hair combed neatly, not to blend in, to be undeniable. "Mama, why are we here?" one twin whispered. "Because sometimes the truth needs witnesses," Ray said quietly. She'd planned this moment for months. The ribbon cutting was open to the public. Community engagement, the foundation's website promised. She had every right to be here. And when the cameras turned on, when Raymond Peterson stood in front of the donor wall, with his perfect smile and his perfect fiancée, her boys would be 3 feet away. Visible, unmistakable, undeniable. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint as Raymond Peterson shook hands with the pediatric wing's new director, cameras flashing in rhythmic bursts. Ashley Carmichael stood beside him in a navy dress that photographed like credibility, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the picture of stability his mother had orchestrated. "Mr. Peterson, if you'll step this way for the ribbon cutting." But Raymond's gaze had snagged on something across the polished stone hallway. A woman, worn jacket, familiar in a way that made his chest tighten, and beside her, 2 small boys, identical twins, dark hair, serious expressions. When one of them looked up, adjusting his grip on his brother's hand, Raymond's breath stopped. It was like looking into a mirror that bent time backward, twice, the slope of the nose, the set of the jaw, the way both boys stood with the same posture, the same tilt of the head he'd seen in his own childhood photos. "Raymond!" Ashley's voice was low, urgent. Her hand tightened on his arm. "The ribbon." He couldn't look away. One of the boys met his gaze directly, 5 years old and already studying him with the same analytical intensity Raymond used in boardrooms. Rachel. The woman's face came into focus. Thinner, tired, but unmistakably the woman who disappeared 5 years ago. The woman his mother had handled. The woman whose name he'd stopped saying aloud because it was easier to believe the narrative than face what silence cost. Raymond, now. Ashley pulled him toward the ceremony setup, her smile never wavering for the cameras. He moved on autopilot, gripping the oversized scissors, saying words about community and healing that meant nothing compared to the two small faces watching him from across the corridor. Security was already moving, two men in suits positioning themselves between the woman and the exits, radios crackling. Ray saw the exact moment Raymond recognized the twins. Saw it in the way his face went pale. In the microsecond, his carefully maintained composure cracked. Good. She squeezed her boy's hands. Stay close to me. Cameras were everywhere. Local news, foundation photographers, guests live streaming to social media. Every angle, every witness. Exactly what she needed. Security moved toward her, but she'd timed this perfectly. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was starting, cameras focused on Raymond and Ashley. If security removed her now, it would create a scene, raise questions, draw attention to the very thing the Petersons wanted hidden. So they waited, watched, positioned themselves between her and the exits but didn't approach. One of her sons tugged her hand. Mama, that man keeps looking at us. I know, baby. Why? Because you're the truth he tried to pretend didn't exist, Ray thought. Because 5 years ago, someone offered me $10 million to make sure you were never born. And today you're standing 3 feet away from the people who wanted you erased. Because sometimes people see things that surprise them, she said instead. The ceremony concluded with applause. Guests moved toward the main ballroom for the gala reception. Ray guided her boys toward the exit, moving with the crowd, staying visible but not confrontational. A photographer's camera swung toward them, a wide shot capturing the departing crowd. The flash went off. Ray kept walking, her twins' hands warm in hers, knowing that somewhere in that camera's memory was a photo that would change everything. 2 5-year-old boys standing 3 feet from Raymond Peterson, their identical faces telling a story no PR machine could spin. By the time they reached the parking lot, her phone was already buzzing. Raymond sat alone in his apartment, Ashley gone, the gala's success celebrated by everyone but him. His phone showed the photos from the ribbon cutting, professional shots of him and Ashley, candid crowd images, social media posts from attendees, and then the background of one photo, enhanced, circulated, going viral. 2 identical boys, dark hair, unmistakable features. Peterson twins trends as mystery children spotted at foundation event. Who are the boys who look exactly like Raymond Peterson? His private email pinged. Unknown sender. Subject line. You once asked for honesty. Try it. He opened it. A single link. No message. No context. Raymond clicked. 3 files appeared, queued but locked. Below them, a single line of text. 5 years ago, your mother offered me $10 million to erase your sons. I said no. The truth has always been there. You just needed a reason to look. Raymond stared at the locked files, his hands shaking. Sons. 5 years. $10 million. His finger hovered over the reply button as the viral photo refreshed on his screen. 2 small boys who had his face, standing in a corridor where his foundation promised to protect futures, while his family had tried to erase theirs. Outside his window, the city glittered with lights that suddenly seemed less bright. Ray sent the passwords at 2 a.m., 3 separate emails, 3 different encryption keys, each one unlocking a piece of evidence that could detonate the Peterson family's carefully constructed empire. She didn't include a message, didn't ask for anything, just gave Raymond Peterson the tools to see what his mother had done 5 years ago and what she'd been doing ever since. Then she waited. The response came 18 hours later. Not words, action. A wire transfer appeared in an escrow account Ray's attorney had established. Not for her, but for the twins. Child support calculated backward to their birth date. Every missed month. Every dollar that should have gone to diapers, medical bills, Rent in walk-ups that smelled like old paint. No message, just math. 2 hours later, a second move. The Peterson Foundation's quarterly disbursement to Summit Futures LLC, one of the shell companies Ray had traced, was quietly frozen pending routine audit procedures. Janet Peterson would need that transfer to cover GALA expenses she'd already committed. Without it, vendors would start asking questions. Invoices would go unpaid. The foundation's gleaming reputation would show cracks. Ray refreshed her encrypted inbox. A new message appeared. Park, East Entrance, Thursday 6 p.m. Come alone. She almost didn't go. Trust had to be earned in increments, and Raymond Peterson's increments were still microscopic compared to 5 years of silence. But the escrow transfer was real. The frozen disbursement was real. And if she wanted to time the GALA reveal perfectly, no escape routes, no spin, she needed coordination. Not just evidence. Ray sat on the park bench at 5:58 p.m., the twins with a sitter she'd vetted 3 times. Raymond arrived at exactly 6:00, no entourage, no security visible. But Ray knew they were there. Parked cars with tinted windows, joggers who circled too many times. He sat on the opposite end of the bench, didn't try to close the distance. I listened to the audio, Raymond said quietly. His voice was different than she remembered, older, strained. My mother offered you $10 million to terminate the pregnancy. Yes. And you recorded it. I did. Raymond looked straight ahead at the playground where other people's children climbed structures built on honest money. The clinic forgery, the fake termination note, I had a forensic analyst review it. The timestamp was altered. The physician's signature was lifted from another document. I know. Ray kept her voice level. Your mother had someone with system access planted after I refused the money. The shell companies, Summit Futures, Horizon Care Initiative, they're routed through my mother's family office. Grants that were supposed to fund community programs were just disappearing. 2.3 million and 1.8 million respectively, Ray confirmed. I have 5 years of cross-referenced records. Raymond finally turned to look at her. Why now? Why wait 5 years? Because I needed the twins to be real, visible, undeniable. Ray met his gaze. And I needed enough evidence that when your mother tries to bury this, and she will, there's no narrative she can control. What do you need from me? Keep freezing transfers she needs. Make her scramble. And when I move at the GALA, don't stop me. Raymond's jaw tightened. What are you planning? The truth, on the largest screen your foundation owns, in front of every donor, every board member, every camera that shows up to celebrate your mother's legacy. That will destroy her. She tried to erase your children. Ray's voice stayed calm, surgical. Forgive me if I don't prioritize her comfort. Raymond stood slowly. The GALA AV system is managed by an outside contractor, Martin Cole. He's sympathetic to situations like this. I'll make sure your name is on his approved list. He walked away without another word, no apology, no plea for the 5 years he'd missed, just logistics. Ray waited 10 minutes before leaving, watching to ensure no one followed. Martin Cole's edit bay was tucked behind a theater district warehouse, walls lined with monitors and equipment that hummed with expensive capability. He was 60, gray-haired, and asked exactly 2 questions when Ray arrived. How long is your clip? 12 seconds. And you need it to run during the donor recognition loop? Yes, right after the Peterson family tribute. Martin nodded once. The foundation bought a 30-second community spotlight slot that's supposed to run at 8:47 p.m. I can swap your file in. Once it plays, it'll take them 90 seconds minimum to kill the feed. That's enough time? More than enough. Martin handed her a secure upload link. Send me the file 24 hours before. Don't use your real name on any metadata, and pay me in cash. Already arranged. As Ray left the edit bay, her phone buzzed. Another encrypted message from Raymond. Discretionary transfer to mother's account frozen. She's been notified of compliance review. You have 3 days before the GALA. Make them count. Ray stood on the street corner as evening traffic moved past, holding a phone that contained 5 years of evidence, and a 12-second video clip that would turn a charity gala into a reckoning. She opened her banking app and initiated the payment to Martin Cole. The ad slot was purchased. The truth had a time code. And in 72 hours, the Peterson Foundation's celebration of protecting futures would learn what happens when futures are protected from the people who tried to buy them. The service corridor behind the ballroom smelled like lemon polish and the kind of panic that money usually prevented. Ray pressed her back against the wall as catering staff rushed past carrying trays of champagne, their eyes forward, their minds on timing and tips, not on the woman in a borrowed dress who didn't belong. She'd entered through the vendor entrance an hour ago, credentials Martin Cole had provided clipped to her dress, AV technical support. Nobody questions support staff at events like this. Her phone showed 8:32 p.m., 15 minutes. Martin's text appeared. File queued, fail-safe copies mirrored to 3 off-site servers. If they pull the plug, it uploads to social automatically. You're clear. Ray typed back, confirmed. She moved toward the AV booth, a small elevated platform at the back of the ballroom where Martin sat surrounded by monitors showing camera feeds, donor wall graphics, and the program sequence that would, in exactly 15 minutes, hand her the microphone she'd been denied 5 years ago. You good? Martin asked without looking up. Almost. Don't be almost. You get one shot. After your clip plays, security will have orders to remove you. Make sure you're positioned where cameras can see, but security can't reach quickly. Ray nodded. She'd mapped the ballroom 3 times. Sight lines, exit routes, the exact angle where live stream cameras would catch her face when the feed played. 8:47, Martin confirmed. Right after the Peterson family tribute montage. 12 seconds. Then chaos. Raymond stood near the donor wall, champagne untouched in his hand, as his mother worked the room with the precision of someone conducting an orchestra. Janet Peterson moved between donors like royalty, her silver gown catching light, her smile promising access and influence to anyone willing to write the right check. She had no idea the checks were about to bounce. Raymond's phone buzzed. His attorney, compliance review filed, Foundation Counsel notified. If financial irregularities surface tonight, investigation protocol activates automatically. You're insulated. He'd spent the last 72 hours building a legal firewall, separating his signature from his mother's decisions, flagging the shell company transfers, putting his own finances into a blind review to prove he hadn't benefited from the schemes Rachel's research had uncovered. Not absolution, just survival. Across the ballroom, Ashley Carmichael stood at the podium reviewing note cards for her speech about intergenerational courage. She'd practiced it a dozen times, a perfect narrative about legacy, responsibility, and protecting the vulnerable. The irony would land in 12 minutes. Ashley adjusted the microphone, her speech memorized but her hands still checking the note cards out of habit. The ballroom was full, 300 donors in evening wear, cameras positioned for the live stream, the donor wall glowing behind her with names etched in backlit stone. Peterson Family Legacy, Fund to Protecting Futures since 1987. She'd written the speech to complement the tribute video. Raymond's grandfather building the foundation, Janet expanding it, the next generation ready to carry it forward. Clean, inspiring, marketable. Raymond stood in the crowd, his expression unreadable. He'd been distant all week, distracted. Ashley had chalked it up to stress. The viral photo of those boys had generated questions he'd deflected with practiced ease. Unfortunate resemblance, he'd told reporters. We're looking into how unauthorized individuals access the ribbon cutting. But Ashley had seen his face in the photo, had seen the way he'd frozen when he looked at those children. She pushed the thought away. The speech was in 7 minutes. Legacy didn't pause for doubt. Ray stood at the edge of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a column, her phone showing Martin's countdown. 2. On the donor wall screens, the Peterson family tribute began. Sepia-toned photos of Raymond's grandfather, clips of Janet cutting ribbons and shaking hands with senators, soaring music that turned money into mythology. 1:30, Janet stood front and center in the ballroom, basking in applause, her hand raised in gracious acknowledgement. 1 and Ashley approached the podium, smile perfect, note card in hand. 0:30. Martin's voice crackled through Ray's earpiece. You're live in 30 seconds. Don't blink. Ray moved out from behind the column, positioning herself where three camera angles converge. She folded her hands in front of her and waited. 0:1. The tribute video ended with the Peterson family seal, a shield, a motto about service, a logo that appeared on hospital wings, and scholarship programs across the state. 0:05. The lights dimmed for the transition to Ashley's speech. 0. The Peterson seal filled the screen, and then the feed stuttered. The seal fractured into static. The sound from the ballroom speakers cut out for one sharp second. When the image returned, it wasn't Ashley's speech. It was a recording, audio playing over a frozen image of a wire authorization form dated 5 years ago. Janet Peterson's voice filled the ballroom, crisp and cold. $10 million. In exchange, you'll sign a comprehensive release and pursue a medical resolution to this situation before the end of the first trimester. The room went silent. Every head turned toward the screens, and Rachel Monroe stepped into the light. The audio played for exactly 12 seconds, but it felt like the ballroom had stopped breathing. Janet Peterson's voice filled the space between crystal chandeliers and donor paddles, each word landing with surgical precision. $10 million, wired within 48 hours. In exchange, you'll sign a comprehensive release, relocate out of state, and pursue a medical resolution to this situation before the end of the first trimester. A pause, then Rachel's voice, younger, steadier than she'd felt that day. You're asking me to terminate the pregnancy. I'm offering you financial security and a fresh start. The Peterson name is not negotiable. An heir without structure, without proper lineage, that's not legacy, that's liability. The audio cut. The screens transitioned to a scanned document. The wire authorization form, Janet Peterson's signature bold across the bottom, the amount typed in neat digits. $10 million. 300 people in evening wear stared at the donor wall, as if the stone itself had cracked open. Ray stood in the camera sight line, her hands folded, her face calm. She didn't shout, didn't need to. The evidence was speaking louder than she ever could. The screen shifted again. A forensic accountant's statement appeared. Dry, procedural language that turned money into crime. Peterson Foundation disbursements to Summit Futures, LLC, and Horizon Care Initiative, totaling $4.1 million between 2019-2024, were routed through family office accounts with no corresponding program deliverables. Recommended immediate audit and regulatory review. Phones rose throughout the ballroom, not to film but to text. Sponsors messaging their CFOs, board members paging their attorneys, donors who'd written six-figure checks suddenly wondering where their money had actually gone. The final image loaded, an ultrasound dated 5 years ago, clinic letterhead visible at the top, 2 heartbeats labeled Baby A and Baby B. Beneath it, a birth certificate. Then another, 2 boys, born 3 months after Janet's offer. Father listed as unknown, and finally a photograph. Current, unmistakable. The viral image from this afternoon's ribbon cutting. 2 5-year-old boys standing 3 feet from Raymond Peterson, their faces identical mirrors of the man who'd never acknowledged them. The timestamp in the corner read, Today, 2:47 p.m. The screens went dark. The ballroom stayed silent. Ray watched the crowd. How stillness became its own kind of noise. How 300 people who'd come to celebrate legacy suddenly couldn't remember how to clap, how to smile, how to pretend money made everything clean. Near the podium, Ashley Carmichael stood frozen, her speech note cards useless in her hand. In the center of the room, Janet Peterson's face had gone pale, her champagne glass gripped so tightly Ray thought it might shatter. And at the edge of the crowd, Raymond Peterson stood with his phone in his hand, staring at the blank donor screens as if they'd stolen something he couldn't name. A reporter near the back broke the silence first, voice cutting through the stillness. Mrs. Peterson, do you have a statement regarding the audio recording? Janet's mouth opened, closed, no sound emerged. Another voice, are those children Raymond Peterson's sons? Cameras turned, phones lifted. The ballroom's careful choreography dissolved into the chaos of questions no PR firm could script away. Security moved toward Ray, but Martin's off-site failsafe had already triggered. The 12-second clip uploading across social media platforms, news feeds, donor networks. Removing her from the ballroom wouldn't remove the truth from the internet. A board member, silver-haired, impeccable in his tuxedo, stood abruptly and spoke to the foundation's legal counsel in a voice loud enough to carry, "We need an emergency session now." Another board member nodded, then another. The dominoes of institutional self-preservation falling in real time. The counsel approached Janet, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Peterson, the board is convening an executive session. They've requested that you step out for the portion that concerns you." "Concerns me?" Janet's voice finally returned, sharp as broken glass. "This is slander. That recording is evidence," the counsel interrupted quietly, "which means we need to address it through proper channels. Please." Janet looked around the ballroom, at donors avoiding her gaze, at cameras still filming, at the donor wall that bore her family name, now looking less like a monument and more like a headstone. Her eyes found Ray across the room. For 5 years, Janet Peterson had wielded silence like a weapon, had used money to erase problems, contracts to bury truth, power to make inconvenient women disappear. But you can't erase a voice that's been recorded. You can't bury children who are standing in daylight. And you can't disappear a woman who's already vanished once and learned how to come back with receipts. Janet turned and walked toward the exit, her silver gown trailing behind her like armor that had suddenly stopped fitting. The ballroom doors closed behind her with a sound like a gavel, and in the silence that followed, sponsors began texting their banks, "Pause disbursement pending review. Freeze grant until audit complete. We need to talk about our partnership." The Peterson Foundation's Protecting Futures Gala had just learned what happens when futures are protected from the people who tried to buy them. Rachel Monroe stood in the ballroom's fading applause, her hands steady, her voice finally heard. The board convened in a private room down the hall, and Janet Peterson waited outside alone, as Consequence knocked on a door she couldn't close. The boardroom smelled like old leather and new fear. 9 board members sat around the mahogany table, their evening wear looking absurd under fluorescent lights, their faces carefully neutral as counsel distributed copies of the forensic accountant's preliminary findings. Raymond stood at the head of the table, not seated, not comfortable, accountable. "The audio recording is authentic," he said without preamble. "5 years ago, my mother offered Rachel Monroe $10 million to terminate her pregnancy. Ms. Monroe refused. She gave birth to twin boys. My sons." The words "my sons" landed like a signed confession. A board member, Margaret Hill, fiduciary law expert, spoke first. "Raymond, are you confirming paternity?" "Yes, DNA testing will formalize what the photographs already show, but I'm not hiding behind paperwork. Those children are mine. I didn't know about the offer until 3 days ago. I didn't know about the legal intimidation, the forged clinic records, or the shell company diversions until Ms. Monroe provided documentation." Another board member, older, wary. "And your role in foundation finances?" "I signed off on grants my mother administered. I didn't audit where the money went after approval. That was negligence, not fraud, but I take responsibility." Raymond slid a folder across the table. "My attorney has placed my personal finances into independent review. If I benefited from any misappropriated funds, I'll make restitution." Margaret Hill nodded slowly. "We need a motion for an independent governance review of all foundation transactions dating back 5 years. "So moved," another board member said immediately. "Seconded." The vote was unanimous. Council made notes. Mrs. Janet Peterson will be formally recused from all foundation decisions pending the investigation's conclusion. We'll need to appoint an interim executive director. Raymond didn't flinch. "My mother built this foundation. She also compromised it. The board needs to act in the foundation's interest, not family loyalty." Margaret looked at him directly. "And you? Your position?" "I'll cooperate fully with the review. If the board determines I should step down, I will." He paused. "But I won't hide from my sons again. Whatever happens to my role here, That part isn't negotiable. The boardroom absorbed that statement like a contract signed in front of witnesses. Outside in the hallway, donor calls were already being logged. Margaret's phone showed 15 missed calls. Counsel's assistant appeared at the door. Major sponsors are requesting emergency meetings. 3 have already frozen disbursements pending review outcomes. The aftermath machine was in motion, and no one could stop it. Ray stepped out the service exit into air that smelled like rain and endings. Reporters swarmed the main entrance, cameras lighting up the sidewalk, questions shouted at anyone in evening wear. She'd left through the kitchen. A reporter spotted her anyway. Young, hungry, microphone extended like a weapon. "Ms. Monroe, can you comment on tonight's revelations? Will you be pursuing legal action against the Peterson family?" Ray kept walking. "No comment." "What about custody? Are you seeking financial support?" "I have nothing to say." Another voice. "Do the children know who their father is?" Ray stopped, turned, met the reporter's eyes with the same calm she'd carried through 5 years of survival. "My son's privacy is not negotiable. They didn't ask to be born into this, and they won't be used as content. If you care about protecting children, start by leaving mine alone." She walked away before anyone could follow up, disappearing into the flow of late-night foot traffic. Her phone buzzed. Raymond's attorney. "Escrow account for child support established. Medical, educational, housing costs retroactive to birth. Documentation being filed with family court tomorrow. No strings, no NDAs." Not an apology, just math finally catching up to biology. Ray texted back, "Received." 2 words. The beginning of accountability, not trust. Ashley Carmichael sat in the office she'd decorated with donor plaques and achievement awards, drafting the statement that would end her association with the Peterson Foundation brand she'd helped build. Her phone showed 43 messages from concerned friends, strategic advisors, and her own mother asking if she was still attached to that family. She wasn't angry. Anger was inefficient. She was recalibrating. The statement on her laptop was professional, measured, expressing support for the independent review, stepping back to allow the foundation to address governance concerns, wishing the Peterson family privacy during a difficult personal matter. No blame, no drama, just a graceful exit that preserved her reputation while distancing her from the fallout. Her publicist had already drafted follow-up talking points about learning experiences and commitment to transparency and philanthropy. Ashley would land somewhere else. Boards liked women who could navigate scandal without collapsing publicly. She saved the statement, scheduled it to release at 6 a.m., and closed her laptop. The Peterson Foundation chapter was over. She'd write the next one somewhere the foundation was actually solid. Janet Peterson sat in the back of a town car, her silver gown still perfect, her hands shaking with rage she couldn't afford to show. Her phone showed the board's decision summary. Recused, pending investigation, all financial authority suspended. 50 years of building, 5 decades of turning wealth into power, into legacy, undone by a recording and a woman who'd refused $10 million. Janet scrolled through her contacts, past attorneys who'd already stopped answering, past donors whose assistants were suddenly in meetings, until she found a name she hadn't called in years. William Lambert, the kind of consultant who didn't have a website, who solved problems quietly, definitively, before they reached courtrooms or headlines. She pressed dial. The phone rang twice. "Mrs. Peterson." William's voice was smooth, unsurprised. "I wondered when you'd call." "I need options," Janet said quietly. "Legal pressure, leverage, something that makes this go away before the audit finds everything." A pause, then, "I'll see what I can do." Janet ended the call and stared out the window at a city that suddenly felt smaller, colder, less willing to look away. One more attempt, one final move, because dynasties didn't fall without a fight. The approach came 3 days after the gala, in a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and calculated menace. Ray was loading groceries into her car when a man in an expensive suit emerged from a black sedan, 2 spaces over. Mid-50s, silver hair, the kind of face that had learned to smile without meaning it. "Ms. Monroe," William Lambert, I represent certain interests that would like to resolve the situation amicably. Ray didn't stop loading bags. I don't know you. I work with families navigating complex reputational challenges. He stepped closer, hands in pockets, posture relaxed but voice carrying weight. The Peterson family is willing to significantly increase the financial arrangement originally proposed. 20 million, 30 if you're amenable, in exchange for a signed statement clarifying that certain recordings may have been taken out of context. Ray closed her trunk, turned to face him directly. The recording wasn't out of context. It was your client offering me $10 million to terminate my pregnancy. Memories can be unreliable. Legal language can sound harsh when isolated from the full conversation. The full conversation is time-stamped and backed up in 4 separate locations, Ray said calmly, including with the Foundation's independent counsel, who's already forwarded it to investigators. So unless you're here to witness tampering in real time, we're done. William's smile thinned. Ms. Monroe, you should consider your children's well-being. Prolonged legal battles, media attention, these things take a toll. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if this concluded quietly? Is that a threat? It's practical advice. Ray pulled out her phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. Say that again, for the record. William's expression flickered, surprise, then calculation. He glanced at the phone, then at Ray's face, reading something there that made him recalibrate. I think we're done here, he said quietly. We were done before you started. He walked back to his sedan without another word. The engine started, and the car pulled away, disappearing down the garage ramp like smoke that had finally cleared. Ray stood by her car for a full minute, letting her hands stop shaking, then forwarded the recording to Raymond's attorney with a single line. Janet's fixer just tried to buy my silence. Thought you should know. Raymond's attorney, Sarah Kemp, sat across from the Foundation's independent counsel with recorders blinking red on the table between them. This is the 3rd documented attempt at witness contact, Sarah said, sliding William Lambert's business card across the desk. First the parking garage approach, then a voicemail to the AV contractor Martin Cole offering consulting fees to recant his chain of custody testimony, and now this. She played the audio. William Lambert's voice, professionally vague but unmistakably pressuring Rachel to clarify her statements. The Foundation's counsel, a woman named Patricia Voss, who'd built a career on cleaning up messes, made notes without expression. I'm forwarding this to the state investigators immediately. This crosses from reputation management into obstruction. Ms. Monroe wants protection for herself and her children, Sarah said. Restraining orders, court-supervised visitation protocols if paternity proceedings move forward, and a clear statement from the Foundation that witness intimidation won't be tolerated. Patricia nodded. I'll draft the protective orders today. As for the statement, she pulled up a document on her laptop, typed quickly, then turned the screen so Sarah could read. The Peterson Foundation is committed to a complete and transparent investigation. Any attempts to influence witnesses, suppress evidence, or interfere with the independent review will be reported to appropriate authorities. Facts will finish what Spin started. Sarah read it twice. That last line is non-negotiable, Patricia finished. If the Peterson family wants to rebuild trust, it starts with acknowledging that truth isn't a PR problem to manage. Public statement, 6:00 p.m. The Foundation released Patricia's statement at exactly 6 p.m., time for evening news cycles. Within an hour, 3 major donors issued their own statements. We support the independent review and expect full accountability. Our partnership will resume only after transparency is demonstrated. Riverside Community Trust. Protecting vulnerable populations requires protecting truth-tellers. We stand with the investigative process. Northwest Philanthropy Collective. Witness intimidation has no place in charitable work. We await the audit's findings before further engagement. The board's emergency hotline logged 47 calls by midnight, some demanding refunds, others pledging support for reform, all making clear that the old playbook of silence and settlements no longer worked when evidence lived on servers no fixer could reach. Rachel's apartment, 9:30 p.m. Ray sat at her kitchen table, twins asleep in the next room, reading the legal documents Sarah had couriered over, protective orders, visitation protocols, a formal acknowledgement of paternity filed with family court, Raymond's signature witnessed and dated, and at the bottom, a check for 5 years of child support, calculated to the day, no strings attached. Her phone buzzed. Sarah's text. Protective measures filed. William Lambert's firm receives cease and desist. Janet Peterson is officially prohibited from contact pending investigation. You and the boys are legally insulated. Ray looked at the documents. Proof that intimidation only worked when victims were isolated, unrecorded, and alone. She'd been none of those things. Outside her window, the city hummed with ordinary life. People who didn't know that truth was sometimes built in parking garages and cafe recordings, one documented moment at a time. Ray saved every file, backed up every conversation, and closed her laptop. Facts would finish what spin started, and for the first time in 5 years, she believed it. The park was empty at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, swings creaking in the wind like forgiveness, asking permission. Ray sat on a bench watching her twins navigate the playground equipment with the fearless precision of 5-year-olds who'd learned early that the world required both caution and courage. Raymond Peterson stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching the same children with an expression somewhere between wonder and grief. "They don't have to call me anything," Raymond said quietly. "Not yet. Not until they're ready." "They'll have questions," Ray replied, "about why you weren't there before. I'll answer them. Honestly," he paused, "I won't blame your silence. I'll explain mine. It wasn't absolution. It was a starting point." One of the twins, the one who asked more questions, who studied faces like puzzles, glanced over at Raymond, curious but cautious. Raymond raised a hand in a small wave. The boy waved back, then returned to the slide. "They look like you," Ray said. "They look like themselves." Raymond's voice was steady. "I missed 5 years. I can't buy that back. But I can show up for the next 13. The next 30. Show up sober. Show up consistently. Show up even when it's inconvenient. I will." Ray believed him just enough to let this moment exist. Not trust yet, just the architecture of it, framed and waiting. 3 weeks later, the Peterson Foundation held a press conference. Not a gala, not a donor luncheon, a boardroom with reporters, cameras, and Margaret Hill reading from prepared remarks that had been vetted by counsel, approved by investigators, and stripped of every euphemism. The independent review has identified significant financial irregularities in foundation operations between 2019 and 2024. Approximately $4.1 million in grant funds were diverted through shell entities with no corresponding program outcomes. Janet Peterson has been removed from all leadership positions. Raymond Peterson has been recused from financial decisions pending compliance review. Margaret paused, looking directly into the cameras. Effective immediately, the Peterson Foundation is implementing the following reforms: mandatory independent audits conducted annually by external firms, whistleblower protections extending to family members and contractors, spousal and family financial carve-outs to prevent asset entanglement, and a public transparency portal where all grants over $50,000 will be tracked with deliverable documentation. A reporter raised a hand. "What happens to Janet Peterson?" "Mrs. Peterson is cooperating with investigators. Any legal consequences will be determined through appropriate judicial processes." Another question. "And the children? Raymond Peterson's sons?" "The children are minors whose privacy will be protected. Mr. Peterson has acknowledged paternity and established support structures. Further details are a private family matter." Margaret closed the folder. "This foundation was built on a promise to protect futures. We failed that promise when we prioritized reputation over accountability. That ends today." The first grant under the new transparency policy went to the neighborhood clinic where Ray had received prenatal care 5 years ago. $50,000 for expanded services, itemized deliverables, quarterly reporting requirements. No Peterson name on the plaque, just Community Health Initiative, funded by anonymous donor. Raymond had signed the approval personally, then stepped back from the spotlight. Ashley Carmichael's exit was announced via a polished statement praising the foundation's courageous reforms, while pivoting to new opportunities aligned with emerging best practices in philanthropic governance. By the following month, she joined the board of a national women's health organization, her reputation intact, her association with the Peterson name, a footnote, not a liability. She sent Ray a single text. "You were right to speak. I should have listened sooner." Ray didn't reply. Some acknowledgments didn't need continuation. Janet Peterson's absence was noted in every quarterly report, every policy revision, every donor letter that rebuilt trust line by careful line. She wasn't erased. She was exactly where consequence placed her. Outside the rooms where decisions were made, outside the foundation she'd built and compromised, answering to investigators who didn't accept legacy as immunity. No villain monologue, no redemption arc, just the natural endpoint of power that mistook silence for consent. 6 months after the gala, Ray walked through the Peterson Foundation lobby, now renovated, newly transparent, with a donor wall that listed contributions alongside outcome reports. At the top, a new motto replaced the family crest. Truth heals not a theme, a policy. Her twins walked beside her, hands warm in hers, as Raymond met them near the entrance for a scheduled visit. Court supervised still, appropriate still, building toward trust through repetition rather than declaration. "Ready?" Raymond asked the boys. They nodded, shy but willing. Ray watched them leave for the afternoon, her sons, his sons, walking toward a relationship that would be built on presence, not promises. She turned back to the donor wall, reading the names of people who'd chosen accountability over allegiance, truth over spectacle. 5 years ago, she'd been offered $10 million to disappear. Today, she walked through doors that had tried to close on her, carrying documentation no one could buy and a future no one could erase. Wealth wasn't measured in wire transfers. It was measured in children who knew their worth, in systems that protected truth tellers, in donor walls that chose honesty over mythology. Rachel Monroe had been offered money to vanish. She'd chosen visibility instead. And in the end, that choice had rewritten more than her story. It had rewritten the foundations. If Rachel's journey moved you, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the Penthouse Diaries for more stories where wealth, power, and private promises collide, and where the truth always finds its voice. Remember, the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. We'll see you in the next story.